speaking of talks, we have an amazing lineup for all those that joined here with that intro video. The lineup for today is absolutely, it's it's outstanding. I'm super excited for it. Who do we have up first, Stacy?
Well, first and foremost, we have the amazing, the fantastic, the splendiferous Veronica Schmitt.
Welcome, Veronica.
Thanks for having me. What an amazing introduction. I need to record that one so I can have it every time I lecture. I think it's like fantastic.
Absolutely. I can write splendiferous in the chat too, so everyone knows how to spell it. Or not, or not.
I love it. So, Veronica, the floor is all yours. We're going to let you take it away and wow us all. I think you have one of for me personally, all of our talks are great, but I think yours and the personal connection to the story is just going to, for me, it shines.
Amazing. As Stacy has said about, things being compromised, I kind of not only did incident response for healthcare delivery organizations, I also found myself in the bed more than I'd like to admit to. So today I wanted to do a different talk than I normally do. Like it's always about how bad things are, but I want to bring a little bit of hope and share with you different perspectives. So let's look into the looking glass of medical device cybersecurity. Okay, but firstly, who am I? Well, I prefer to be called V. Only my mother called me Veronica when I seem to be in trouble. I am currently actually doing my PhD in designing robust logging within medical devices to kind of help improve incident response on these devices. Most developers within the medical device space will call me the log genie. You only have to say bad logs 3 times and I will magically appear to come tell you what to fix. All in all, I am very passionate about DFIR. I lead a program in Norway at the North University College where we actually teach digital forensics and incident response. I probably have an unhealthy obsession buying medical equipment, breaking them, and then investigating them to determine whether or not there's actually evidence left behind. We also teach medical device forensics. Most students are currently actually solving a murder based upon evidence that we generated on medical devices. So you can say that this is passionately a topic that I love. I'm also a cyborg. Buy me a cup of coffee, I'll tell you all about that. But this is literally the thing that keeps me alive. So the question I also always get is, well, why do you care so much? Well, let's just say I've had my little device. You see that beautiful one there in the X-ray? That's kind of kept me alive since 19. I physically wouldn't have been here. I'm kind of wired into the internet of medicine. Talk about being your own ecosystem. Well, I kind of am. But here you can see some of my devices that I also have that I've reverse engineered and worked on. The one that you're looking at there in the top right, that is actually a hemodialysis machine. I probably got too many forensic images of it, but I can tell you that I have seen it all and probably own about 30 devices on my own. Don't ask me how I got them. That's a secret that I will never tell. But I like to play games. Do you guys like to play games? I certainly hope so, because we are going to play a game of imagination. So if the audience is ready, I'd like you to imagine an island. It's barren. There's nothing on it. Now you have a certain job. I want you to build the following on that island. I want a high-tech mansion with all the bells and whistles. I want it to be able to be extended over the years. I also want periodically want to upgrade it. And it should last for a long time, right? I don't have a lot of budget to constantly fix it. So let's look. That should be straightforward. Right? That should be something easy. I've given you the requirements. I've given you the platform or the hardware to build it. And we would imagine that that wouldn't be too complicated. Well, let's look at it. In principle, yes, you have now created a beautiful mansion that fulfills all the requirements. However, nothing is ever as straightforward as it seems. And 3 years later, I knock on your door and I say, hey, I'd like you to make it bigger, better, I want you to update it. I want you to upgrade it, and I want to expand it more. Well, easy enough still. But then again, 3 years later, I come with the same situation. And that is, at some point, our island becomes too small and everything comes toppling down. Now, you might wonder, what on earth does this have to do with medical device cybersecurity? And I'm going to tell you what. Typically, medical devices are designed to last between 10 and 17 years. They're constrained to the hardware that they are built on. While software can update, we cannot update software if our hardware cannot support it. So much like the island that I just showed you that we kept updating and kept building onto, when that island can no longer support what is built on top of it, it really cannot be updated. Now, the medical devices could be perfectly fine, but cybersecurity, they might be a nightmare because they last 10 to 17 years. My little device specifically connected to my heart, the one that goes boom, 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 or kicks me in the chest when I misbehave, lasts now 17 years. My first one lasted 10 years. Now, in that time, you might imagine it was fantastic when it was built on day one. However, 17 years later, everything's outdated. So it may be secure when it's manufactured, but it will certainly not remain that way forever. I always ask cybersecurity professionals this question because unless you have an implanted device, it's difficult to imagine. If the device becomes obsolete in terms of cybersecurity, does that mean we should explant it? If it's still perfectly fine as a medical device? From a patient's perspective, I'm probably going to say to you, no, I'm not going to have that operation because it's still functioning and giving me life-sustaining treatment. So it's always better to try and understand the perspective of the patient. There's nothing to be terrified about. I see a comment that people are terrified for me. I can tell you that for us patients, there's nothing terrifying about the fact that we've given extra heartbeats, extra memories. To give you an idea, at the age of 19, when I was diagnosed and had 2 weeks left to live, I didn't have any kids. I didn't have a master's degree, nor was I very advanced in my career. The device that I got from the manufacturer that keeps me alive gave me the ability to have 2 daughters, gave me the ability to go study my master's, to do what I love. So I can tell you that for a patient, there's nothing terrifying about it. It's a sign of hope. It's something that gives us what we wouldn't have had. We are going to talk about remote patching in a little bit when we start looking at the different perspectives. And this is what I kind of want to talk about because we have so many perspectives, but one device. And it becomes very difficult when all these voices come in, but it's a single device that has to do this. So I wanted to bring you a different talk because I could have come doom and gloom, but I reached out to all my friends in the industry and I said, what is your opinion? What is your perspective? Where do you see the challenges lie? And I want to share the community. So from healthcare delivery organizations to patients to medical device manufacturers, what are they struggling with? What is important to them? And you will see that perhaps these things are not as different as we think. So let's start with our healthcare delivery organizations, our hospitals, our clinics, our medical personnel. I really did try to get a geographical representation around the world. So there is a European perspective and there is a perspective from the US. Okay. So firstly, Mitch Parker from Indiana University Health. When I said to him, well, what are some of the things you struggle with? And one of the things that they do struggle with is the complexities of the technology stacks. And we seem to be adding layers of complexities for hospitals to actually deal with medical devices. If you think about just the types of medical devices when walking through a hospital, all of those have different communication methods, have different security maturity, and all around maybe even running different operating systems and come with different challenges. So from the healthcare delivery organization point of view, it's quite a struggle dealing with these complexities and diversities and figuring out how to best protect it. A lot of the time, network segmentation and network monitoring is the only option we have. Now, we also need to understand that cybersecurity in the healthcare space is very under-resourced and understaffed. You will sometimes have a hospital of 300 plus people having a single cybersecurity individual. Now, if we think about how things are going and the risks are increasing, our budgets aren't growing any further. Another thing is the persistent threats that are hitting hospitals. Healthcare is one of the number one hit industries at the moment. I have gotten so many calls from hospitals across the world saying, how do we protect ourselves? How do we deal with these things? And early detection remains one of the key things that hospitals need to do. But medical devices do complicate that. Okay. Another thing is that budgets have been kind of slashed, but we got more data to deal with, and data equals risks. We are living in the world where information is the currency that we deal in. And kind of Mitch puts it that, adding a medical device into your network or to your hospital is kind of like playing Jenga. They don't have the time to properly plan this, nor do they have the budget or the resources, yet the device is critical for medical care. And when that Jenga block comes down, the affected party is patients and caregivers. So I think it's very important to understand that from a healthcare delivery organization, they're really facing a difficult task with implementing medical devices into their spaces. Now I reached out to someone, Leanne Torgensen, she does a lot of work in educating medical staff into how to respond to cyber risk, how to communicate cyber risk. And for her, it's all about coming together and talking. We have organized cybercrime, but we don't do very well in sharing information, even in the healthcare space. And I think we can generally do better to share our challenges and transparently talk about information. This is not a thing of one person can solve it all, but it's rather a village is needed to keep patients safe. But it starts with an open dialogue. If I had to ask everyone on the chat who has been hacked, I will put up my hand and say I have. Well, we tend to shy away of openly saying that I've been compromised as if it's something that is negative and something that is bad. I always say to people, well, congrats, join the club. It's not the fact that you've been compromised, but how you deal with it. Medical devices add a complexity to that because it's a device that we cannot control and potentially a device that goes into a network that has to have a device that is not controlled. And it's very important that we need to know how to communicate this information to patients. Another thing that Leanne, from her perspective, is hospital system preparedness and cybersecurity awareness. And I must say that I echo this. I have spoken to medical personnel within hospitals and said, where is your incident response plan? And I kind of noticed that they look over into a shelf and there is a red binder. And they're like, what's in that binder? And I'm like, when last did you look at it? And the thing is, well, we did it when we did training a few years ago. And what we've realized is that medical staff are generally overwhelmed. We are expecting them as cybersecurity professionals to handle front-facing to patients when an incident takes place without giving them the tools to do so. There is a concern about hospital systems largely being outdated. A lot of legacy is being faced by these healthcare organizations. I can tell you every time I've spoken to a cardiologist about cyber risk or cybersecurity in terms of medical devices, there is a concern that patients might be scared and they might feel increased anxiety. But I think it's because doctors don't understand how to verbalize that to patients. The emphasis here is also integrating cybersecurity awareness into resilience. We want our hospitals to remain resilient, to be able to function without technology. Okay. Now, obviously, we had some healthcare delivery organizations that preferred not to be named for whatever reason, and I'm always one to very much respect that. This is also someone that I've closely worked with. And what we've noticed is that when implementing security measures without compromising usability is difficult. We might have a medical device that is absolutely fine and functions well and is the best of the medical device that it can be, but it's not the best cybersecurity device. So it's always this balancing act of versus what is good for the patients whilst understanding what the risk to the hospital is to have a specific medical device. For example, is security requires personal accounts for tracking. We want attribution to an account that's accessed something. A lot of medical devices worked on shared accounts or no accounts at all. So their, personal identity is not very strong. And why is that the case? Because of efficiency. I've had someone say to me, Veronica, why don't we just do username and passwords on an implant? And my question to them is, so whilst I'm having one of my cardiac events, I need to come back and be present and say to them, oh, by the way, my username and password is X, Y, and Z. No, we need these devices to be accessible so that patients can receive their treatment. I think it all comes down to that healthcare delivery organizations really are concerned about the fact of staying operational. They're also very much concerned about patient safety. There is definitely collaboration needed between healthcare delivery organizations and cybersecurity professionals. But we should also be mindful to kind of understand the challenges that they face. Okay. So that was the perspective of the healthcare delivery organizations. Feel free to pop questions in. I'm happy to take questions while I'm presenting. I'm an academic, so I'm used to it. If I miss something, I will reach out and try and cover most of it. So from a medical manufacturer perspective, so the people actually building the devices, they generally followed a purely safety-driven approach, right? To now 5 years later. So this is from 5 years ago when I first started doing what I was doing and actively engaging with manufacturers. But they moved from being purely safety-driven to now starting to incorporate security, but it is a major challenge. We are really trying to change the way that we've done things for years and manufactured devices for years. But we also need to understand we deal in probabilities of failures. We try and quantify risk to say that the risk of a medical device potentially being compromised versus the impact is kind of slightly different because the attackers that attack these devices aren't probabilistic. They do follow unique ways to get into these devices. Another key thing is threat modeling. It's essential to what we do. Now, there's lots of kind of support about, threat modeling and how to attack something. And I like using cornucopia, but I don't have the cybersecurity professionals threat model the system. I have the developers hack their own system. Because who better than the person that's designed the device to actually start taking it apart? I can tell you software engineers make some of the most evil hackers I've ever encountered. But it's good for them to consider in their building process how someone might manipulate their device. I always get asked, but will someone actually hack a device? And it's no different than stabbing someone. It's a crime of opportunity. Now, every stage in the quality system process where safety is traditionally considered, we should be actually considering security. Because security in medical devices are actually a quality issue. Because now we want devices to be secure in the day and age that we live in. So from concept to testing to deployment to post-market surveillance, security should be considered as a quality aspect of a device, not simply something we bolt on afterwards. Chris Reed, who is the Senior Director of Cybersecurity Regulatory Policy at Medtronic and a good friend of mine, sent me a quote to use. And he says, there are two challenges that I'm focused on. Given increasing connectivity and software in medical devices, first, how do we engineer medical devices to be resilient in the worst real-world conditions? Second, how do we support secure deployment and use of our technologies through their life cycles? It is important to note that planning and delivering appropriate updates based on devices architecture is essential to maintaining resilience. So if we look at this from a medical manufacturer perspective, again, resiliency comes up quite a lot. Updatability is quite there. Not much different than what we see coming from the healthcare delivery organizations. Now, I can tell you that we are bringing in medical devices in the worst cyber landscape in years. But it's much like that island. We are constrained by hardware, yet we are bolting all these things that we need to update it completely all the time. Someone made mention of remote updatability. And I can tell you that is something that scares everyone in the conversation because there's so much that can go wrong with firmware updates. And there was a manufacturer that pushed updates, even though they were in the cardiologist offices, there was still problems with updating the firmware. Now, John Volek, who's a senior principal product security engineer in EMEA CRDN for Medtronic, says the practice of non-disclosure in transferred risk offers no place of safety. We risk business, patients, reputation, and trust. If we are uncomfortable disclosing the risk, what does that say for accepting it? And I think this is the conversation we should also be having. Should we not be discussing with each other when something has a cyber risk or when there's a vulnerability? Shouldn't we be having an industry where we can self-disclose without being made, to feel guilty? And I think the important thing here is transparency. And I love seeing this from manufacturers, that we've moved from a place where 5 years ago, I couldn't have a conversation with a manufacturer without legal being at the table. So now having conversations where we have regulatory speaking to hackers, manufacturers speaking to hackers, and even bug bounties for medical devices. So it is an interesting time to be alive. Now let's look at HISAC. HISAC brings the medical manufacturer with the HDOs together and kind of allows them to have a place to communicate. If you haven't looked at HISAC, it is really something I can recommend. Phil Eglad, VP of Medical Device Cybersecurity, gave me a quote that says the most significant challenge is securing medical devices in the diversity of technology and clinical settings that defies traditional scalability. The over 550 types of software-enabled medical devices with different threats, risks, and available controls challenges both producers and users to design, monitor, and respond to an increasingly hostile environment. So I can tell you again, we see the convergence of diversity, different opinions. But again, there's such a big challenge that we are facing. Now, I think when we think about how things are updated and how things improve, a medical device is not like a laptop or a desktop or any kind of normal computer. While it has the same hardware, it generally is constrained with the ability to grow. Now, probably for me, the most important perspective on the soapbox that I'm actually going to jump on, because I am a patient and I've been a patient since 19. What I want to say to you is my single quote, your single thing that you take away is a functional medical device equals quality of life for a patient. Often patients are the one that pays the price for the cybersecurity that we put in a medical device or in the healthcare delivery organization, or for when things go down. It's the patient that doesn't receive the care. Now, the thing that patients, when I spoke to them, and yes, I do speak to patients and ask them, are you concerned that your device might be hacked? Do you understand cybersecurity? Because I'm not afraid to have those uncomfortable conversations. The questions that I get asked is more related about personal health information. I myself am concerned about the data my heart generates. It's the most vulnerable data you will find. Patients fear a cyber attack. I can tell you it's something that scares us, especially when the media is very excitingly putting a pacemaker there and saying your medical device can be hacked, even though the article has got nothing to do with it. We see movie series like Grey's Anatomy, The Resident, and The Good Doctor portraying attacks on medical devices that are so far outside the realm of possibility, it's not even funny. So we need to avoid fear mongering when we speak to patients because they are scared enough at the moment. I wonder, can someone tamper with my device remotely? Others have wondered it as well. But then I need to ask you the question, right? We are so connected in the world. Really, is it any different than that? I personally am more worried about the device failing than I am worried about the device being compromised, just my specific device. But I also know that there's backups built in. It's not just a press of a button and the implant is off. There's complexities in that system and how it works. But I think the one thing that we need to be wary of is the perception that we create outside. Because imagine a patient that goes into a cardiologist's office and says, well, I don't want to get a device because it's not safe to get one. I think that would take away 20 years that that patient potentially could have lived. For us, it is a decision between life and death. Patients are concerned about updates, right? We want to know that if something goes wrong, it can be updated. We want to know that is that device going to be around for when we need it? Now, the question I ask, if we cannot update it, does that mean that we need to explant it? Does it mean we need to pull it off the shelves, or is it fine to still be a device? Like, we also want to know, how will future threats be handled? The key takeaways here is it has multiple perspectives with one device, kind of like building that island. There's hardware constraints, but never forget there's a person attached to it. Security will never trump usability and integrity, but there is no kind of silver bullet. If you want to get involved, Biohacking Village brings everyone together in a room, finds the vulnerabilities and fix it. Go check them out. And then feel free to contact me if you have any questions. I'm always happy to talk about medical devices, their uses, their cybersecurity, and even their forensics. Thank you very much.
That was awesome. No, absolutely. Like it was wild. It was wild to hear about it. Like that was, we talk about it all the time. Like I talk to my friends about it. And we just talk in general. 'Cause my wife and I absolutely love watching every medical show known to mankind. We're presently watching The Resident right now. Things will pop up and it's like, I understand why you're doing it for, like, you have to make the show exciting, but it does lean to something that might be more susceptible to like believing what they see on that television. It's like, oh, it's kind of scary at times.
It is, but that's what we kind of doing in teaching kind of more cyber awareness for healthcare stuff. Like, the single thing I say to hospitals is, have you asked your nurses to let you know that a medical device is not functioning? I see there's a question about an infusion pump. I can tell you that the nurse is the first one that's going to notice that that infusion pump is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, because they are our best EDR is our nurses and doctors in the hospitals, not some fancy blinking light. But if you wanted to go see their Christian Dumbass, they did at RSA. They had a doctor come in and they simulated a cyber attack on an infusion pump where they actually, the doctor, that was the last place that the doctor thought of, which means as cybersecurity professionals, we've done a disservice to our medical personnel.
Yeah, I totally agree. I really like your perspective about being both a professional and a patient, and talking more about, hey, we need to have candid conversations about when these things happen. And I've noticed that too. It's getting a little better as time goes on, where we can get more of those candid conversations, more people actually talking about being breached instead of keeping it a secret. So another thing I wanted to ask, just, we have tons of great comments and questions here in the chat too, but whenever it comes down to it, you had mentioned you've been a patient since 19. When did you start getting into, like, really looking into medical device hacking? Was it around that same time?
Well, I kind of started with a coffee machine in the hospital because I was bored and had my laptop and was on the Wi-Fi. And that proceeded, at least I do responsibly disclose, but that's led to, in South Africa, not being allowed to have equipment when I was in ICU and hospital. The other time, the first medical device was I hacked into a patient monitor from my ICU bed because I was bored it was, I think, 20. and then was watching my heartbeat and finding it fantastically awesome how irregular and broken it was. It's where I came up with beautifully broken and wonderfully flawed. I can tell you the CISO and cybersecurity officer was less than impressed, but that was kind of how I got. And then I had my first conversation with the medical device manufacturer and their legal team. But that's since gotten a lot better where we can now have discussions without legal being at the table. And I just want to give a shout out. The FDA's new cybersecurity guidance now contains forensics in it, as well as incident response, as well as logging. So that means we've really taken strides in what we want from our medical devices.
That's incredible. I really liked your perspective on things throughout this entire talk that you did. And
Thank you very
actually,
much.
yeah, absolutely. So, I like the comment, the very honest and raw where I was just bored. That's why I did it. So, anyone else, if that resonates you, just give us like a one in the chat because I feel that really hard. A lot of the things I think that we do is out of sheer curiosity or boredom sometimes.
Well, yeah, that's why I don't have a budget for any hair care facial products because it all gets spent on medical devices because eBay is my friend. And working at a university, I get to import all the equipment I want and then just have fun with my students, reverse engineering them. And I think it is something that needs to be done. So if you want to get involved, go to the biohacking village in Las Vegas. It's going to change your life. It's what changed my life and got me talking to manufacturers and the FDA to kind of help influence it. So this is a shout out to everyone. Just get involved. Just get your hands dirty. It's great fun.
Yeah. And the biohacking village is a great shout out. There are tons of villages, across different communities, whether that's at DEF CON, B-Sides, any of these SANS events that you come to. There's even InfraGard events. So get involved. You can find them on Meetup. You can find them on LinkedIn. All kinds of great ways to start or, maintain that type of interest to keep yourself from getting bored.
I love it.
Boredom, boredom equals trouble. That's all I'm saying.
Veronica, I definitely have appreciated you joining us this morning. It was absolutely phenomenal. I know everybody watching really enjoyed the story, kind of just opening up their eyes to a lot of it. Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.